So my name is Sharon Fraser and I'm the General Manager for Go Goldfields. And Go Goldfields is how we work together across the community in Central Goldfields Shire to achieve social outcome. How this work got started was the census came out, the one before last came out, and as was always the case, we were 79 out of 79 shires in the state of Victoria in the ACFID index. The ACFID index is the socio-economic index, so it basically is the higher you are in your social economic status, the lower the number. So the number one community is the community that has the highest household income, the most stable housing, their kids complete education, they have the resourcing to basically get on and do what they need to do in their lives. They have high levels of social connectivity, it's that sort of stuff. And we were 79 out of 79, which isn't a desirable position really to be in. We had a charismatic mayor at the time who really wanted to tackle this. Not all councillors in local government do want to tackle this. He wanted to tackle it. They did a whole lot of work around building a business case, which was looking at all of the data and pulling it together, not on a sector base, but everything they could get their hands on that told the story of the community. And one of the things that I think was a stroke of genius at the time was they didn't only paint the negative story, they also looked for the strengths. So they also looked for what it is that the community did really well. And they also held lots and lots of conversations. At the same time, there were two service leaders, one from family services and one from the P to 12 and special school locally, who had done some annual planning, and the annual planning was the same as it always had been, and so they decided they were sick of that. So basically these three people got together and decided to make a change, did a whole lot of work, and really came up with that really if we were going to do anything, that we had to change how things were sitting for children, youth and families in the Shire. So not surprisingly, that then became the focus of the work. There had been lots and lots of things tried in the past, most of them programmatic solutions. If there was an initiative that a government was putting out to tackle disadvantage, to tackle underachievement at school, to tackle kindergarten attendance, whatever, we got it. There had been many attempts to helicopter in solutions. There had been many attempts at a sectorial based solution, so all of the health and human services folk would get together. There had been multi-service and cross-sectorial partnerships that had gotten together. So it wasn't a space that people hadn't tried to do things in the past. So that was the sort of stuff that had happened. And really what we set out to do is we set out to understand and work with how we could possibly all come together to do these things differently. And as we were embarking upon this journey, we came up with a plan, we did some lobbying, we got some funding from state government because we're in a marginal electorate. At a state government level, there were 300 votes for us between the winning person and the person who came second. So, it's a significant point of leverage for us, and I do not step away from that. So what we then did was we managed to get bipartisan support before a state government election. We developed a plan that was a 3-year plan to get us launched, and we thought we'd get like $2.50 here and $2.50 there, but because of this marginal state government position that we're in, we got bipartisan support for $2.5 million over 3 years. So then when we set about implementing this plan, of course it's one thing to have a plan to get a bucket of money, but it's another thing to have a plan to actually implement it. And there wasn't, in all honesty, that much in the plan that was going to make the social change that we needed, but it was a plan that governments could look at and understand and fund. So we then did some work to keep the integrity of the work that had been funded. So we were very keen that we had, when I started partway into this process, end of December 2012, and I started end of December 2011, and the funding came in the beginning of 2012. And I said to the then Go Goldfields Alliance, who were leading this work, which was a group of service leaders, do you think that you've employed me to implement this plan, or do you think that you've employed me to achieve meaningful change for children, youth and families in the Shire? And they said, we think we've employed you to achieve meaningful change for children, youth and families in the Shire. And I thought, we are going to rock, because they had spent many hours and much invested interest in the work that they had done, but they were so committed to changing the lives of these children that they were willing to throw that away if it was not the right path. And that's a powerful position to be in as a group of sector leaders.
So, Sharon, can you just go back a step when you say we to talk to this alliance and how it got formed from those three people? How did that alliance come about?
What happened was those three people touted this idea around of discontent with the status quo, discontent with how things had gone, that, you know, there had been all this money, you know, this funding comes into the Shire. All of this money comes in, all of this best interest comes in, all of these people really want it to be different, but nothing was moving. In fact, if anything was happening, the statistics were going backwards. So they basically used that point of discontentment to get people aligned, to want to come together to make the change, to make a difference. And then they did a whole lot of conversation. They got each organisation who were highly and deeply committed to just kick in $5,000 each. So they kicked in, a few of them kicked in $5,000 each. They got a pool of $25,000, and they used that to actually build the plan. So it was something that they all owned and that they were all interested in. There are different layers of commitment around that table, particularly at that time. Some people really wanted there to be change in the community. Some people wanted to keep an eye on the people who wanted to see change in the community in case there was a bucket of funding came along, and you don't want to miss out on anything like that, do you? And other people wanted to keep an eye on those people to see if their competitors were getting funding. So there was a very mixed bag around the table.
So who were they?
Who were they? It was health, so the local hospital, education, local government, justice, policing, family services, some partnership groups themselves, so primary care partnerships, which is a health partnership group, Learn Locals, which is a learning education partnership group. Who else did we have at that time? The police, I'm not sure if I said the police. So a whole, quite an eclectic group. So it wasn't sectorially based. At that time though, we didn't have business around the table, and we didn't have any decision makers around the table. So it was purely those sort of service leaders. And people had to be a CEO or have that, as you were saying, that authority to make the decision in the room. So nobody, if somebody came in and they said, I can't decide that, I have to take it back, then it was never going to work.
And what was the shared purpose that people came together around?
Well, at that time, it was around wanting to change it, wanting to change this 79 out of 79, and wanting to improve the social outcomes for the community. So it was as broad as that, really. And then we did some work about, well, what does that mean in the real world, and what are the things, if you really wanted to achieve social change, it needed to focus on. And that's when it got narrowed down to children, youth and families. We were really keen to focus on outcomes. And the outcomes at that stage too were quite significant. So it's about reducing the child protection reporting rate. It's around parents having increased skills and confidence to do what they needed to do. It was about young people being connected to education and training to achieve employment outcomes. So it was those sorts of changes that were initially defined. And we really went on that journey until the end of 2014. And we had a major reflection at that time about, what's worked, what's not worked, etc. And although we had consulted a lot with community and involved community a lot, we actually had never shared power with the community. And So at the end of 2014, there were two fundamental decisions made that changed the course of the work. And one was that we would share power with the community, and the other one was that we would we bring the data more centrally into driving the community change. And those two things, you know, of course, and we formally adopted collective impact, adaptive leadership at that time. So the three pillars that were from there were to underpin the work was collective impact, adaptive leadership, and sharing power. So they were the three things. And you know what it's like, you take people away for 2 days, you feed them well, you put them in a room like this, you have a whole lot of good time, and they get very excited and they come up with these major decisions. And then when we played that out, it was quite a different thing to the holistic support for those ideas that we had in that room at that time. So although everybody was very excited about sharing power and moving it away from just the service leaders to others, when we came to play that out, it was warts and all. And
can you give some examples?
Well, we, as a part of that sharing power and a part of setting up a collective impact, we decided that we would build a collaborative table. And that collaborative table would have decision makers on it, it would have business, it would have community, and it would have some service leaders. But it meant that instead of having 12 service leaders sitting around a decision making table, we were going to have 3 or 4. So who were going to be the 3 or 4? It also meant that this thing, because we at that time too, we had quite a positive reputation, and organisations were using their involvement and their role in the leadership table as Go Goldfields for also leveraging funding. You know, oh, we're in Go Goldfields and so therefore we need funding for this particular service, that sort of stuff. So there was a fear of loss of funding, there was a fear of loss of status, there was a fear of loss of being involved in the main game that was going on. And all sorts of conversations played out. So another complicating factor was 4 of the significant drivers of our work, who were leaders in this work and helped us make that decision at the end of 2014, for one reason or another left their organisations. And the new people who came in were much more organisational players than they were community social change players. So we were doing this transition away from that group into a collaborative table, and we had a significant power base came in that wanted to pull it back. We had the other thing that we did was we set up the collaborative table, and we still kept the alliance running. So for 12 months we had this, you know, we had this, and I'm feeding both tables like they're both decision makers, which confused the bejeebies out of everybody, including myself. All right, so the whole idea was we'd set this up and we'd transition over, but because the Go Goldfields Alliance was struggling to let go, instead of that being a couple of months, it ended up being 12 months. We had this meeting at the end of August 2016, which was where the Alliance wanted to make the decision to shut down the collaborative table. Let's just turn it off. We'll go back to how things were in the good old days. And I remember facilitating this conversation thinking, how in the world am I going to get this through? But really just kept asking them lots of questions, you know, where they wanted to see the community, how would we respond considering the journey that we've been on. We'd done a whole lot of work with the community, we'd done a whole lot of prepping, we're actually running this other table. How did they actually really see that playing out? What did they think would be the impact on reputation? What would be the impact on the outcomes? You know, all of that sort of stuff, to try and get them to their own decision of actually it's not a good idea to shut down the collaborative table. So then they didn't want to shut down the collaborative table, but they wanted to have all of them move over onto it and just have a few others. So I'm thinking, well, how am I going to get through this one? So what I did between that meeting and the next meeting is I went and talked to all of them a lot and actually tried to unpack what was their particular interest and passion in the work, and showed that even if they weren't on that table, there was a place for all of them in the work somewhere. So no one was going to be left out in the cold, no one was going to lose anything, but if anything, it would be a closer matching of people's passions and interests within the work. What we did concurrently was we were running a whole lot of, in 2015 for the year, as a part of reviewing and renewing our work, we ran a whole lot of community conversations. And as a part of the community conversations, we talked about power, and we also talked about the role that community could take in the work. And we defined those roles in 3 ways. You could be a collaborator, which meant that you came onto one of our tables, you were a part of making decisions, you were a part of the work, you were a true partner in crime. You could be a consultant, and that meant you didn't want to come to any formal meetings, but if we were moving on something that was of an interest to you, you wanted to be asked about it. Or you could be a neighbour, and that was people who didn't want to be consulted with, they didn't want to sit on tables, but they wanted to keep an eye on us to keep us honest. Okay, so we set up these roles so that people could, as a part of the conversations and refreshing the direction of the work, we talked about power, we talked about sharing of power, and we asked them what they thought that meant. Because we were really honest, we're still trying to work out what this means. If we shared power with the community, what does the community think that means? And what would it need to look like if we got it right? And not philosophically in an academic world, but what would you be seeing and how would you be seeing things play out if we shared that power? And people came back with things like, we don't want to have business heavy language with heavy agendas, and we don't want to have minutes, and we don't want to have some of that formal meeting structure that we don't even understand. So we got a whole lot of messaging about that. So we don't do that. We've taken all of that out of our tables. We've taken all of that out of our work. There was a whole lot of people saying, and keeping it in words that we understand. So we put everything through a fog scale. So nothing goes out that anybody with an education level greater than a 12-year-old can read. And yeah, so we did a whole lot of work about preparing the community. And then when we eventually turned off the alliance and moved to the collaborative table, it became really obvious that we had just underprepared the government decision makers and some of the service leaders for this change. And how some of those folk came to the table is some of them came to the table overly respectful and giving too much space to people in the community, and others came wanting to demonstrate that their voice was more important at the table, you know. But basically there was a real uncertainty of how to act. And so what we did at the end of November last year was we had 2 days that we called resetting the table, which I thought was quite good, really. And we decided that a part of resetting the table is we had to get expert voice into the change. And so we had Michelle Lucas from Opportunity Child, who has deep understanding of collective impact. We had Liz Skelton come in around the adaptive leadership piece, and we had really, really good facilitation that we were lucky enough to access PwC's The Difference through our partnership with Opportunity Child, as well as our collaborative table kicking in some dollars as well. And we spent the first day deep diving into the concepts of the work. So what is adaptive leadership? What is sharing power? What is collective impact? You know, how are some people playing this out in a different way? And then we spent the second day rebuilding the table. Now, the thing that was of real interest to me, I stayed very quiet during those 2 days because a lot of people looked to me as the leader of the initiative to get them out of a hole. And it's one of those things that, and I wanted to get them out of the hole, but it's one of those things that if they were not going to do it themselves, we were never going to get there. And the thing that was of interest for me in sitting back, it was actually our community leaders that led the others to the change. Because we had prepared them when others around the table got anxious about something or angry about something, 9 times out of 10 it was a community leader who stepped in and sorted it. And it really demonstrated then, I think, to them, to the whole group, how, well, actually, you can make assumptions about who's got the skills based on all of that power stuff, when really the who does what and what time can come from a very surprising position.
And can you speak a bit about your role, how your role was set up, what your role was and how you got authorised in that to enable this collaboration?
Yeah, beautiful. The local government, so the Central Goldfields Shire Council, is the backbone of our collaboration, and Council decided to set my position as a general manager. So it's a director level, so it's an executive role within the organisation. And I actually think it was a very clever decision, because often these things have a project manager or a project officer, and they're spending their whole time trying to create an authorising environment for the work. Whereas what happens, because I'm in an executive position in the local government, it gives me door opening. I can go and meet with the CEO. Some CEOs I have to take my CEO with, because it's important for them to have a tall man in a blue suit come along with me. And if they need a tall man in a blue suit, then I take Mark along with me, but because I'm in an executive position, it means I don't have to negotiate myself into executive rooms. So that's actually been really useful. The other thing that it's also helped too is it's helped get this work into the executive decision making of the organisation, so that we can put the lens of my work into decisions. Now, we're in a rural community in central Victoria. We're not in a groovy, forward-thinking suburb in an inner city area. So things like gender equity is like, we've got a lot of people saying, oh, political correctness has gone too far and it's like bullshit and, that sort of stuff. So, we're not operating in an environment that is, full of lefties who just want to, support your change and think that you're great. Unfortunately, So therefore, for me, a part of the road that I tread is when to push and how far to push, so that I don't scare the horses too much. And I've learnt that because I have scared the horses too much. So for example, as we were talking about before, we've taken our business processes out of the work as much as possible. Well, it scared the bejeebies out of the CEOs. This is not real work. This has not got integrity. There's no professionalism, that sort of stuff. So what we do is any meeting where there's service leaders, so for a service redesign meeting, we have every business thing that you can imagine. We have beautiful agendas that go out a week before with papers, and we have minutes that are taken, and the minutes go out within a week of the meeting. So all of those good business processes we keep in the meetings that only have the service leaders or the senior government folk in. But any meeting that we have with community, then we have running sheets, and the running sheets we keep word light and pictorially high, and we also in our and this is all readily available on our website gogoldfields.org, so you can have a look at any of these. We also have for notes for our meetings, and everything has to fit onto an A3 sheet, and again it's to be word light and pictorially high. Of course, what happens over time is sometimes they get word dense again, and we've got to pull ourselves back as well, because it's new for us as well. And what we did was we met with senior people from the Department of Education and Training and said, if this is getting traction, it's really working well for the teachers, it's working well for the kids, how do we get that same language, that same thinking into the broader community, so that the parents are learning it at the same time that the kids are learning it, so that this how we treat each other more respectfully becomes more of the way we do things in the culture of this community. And so that work has then turned into a couple of the larger employers picking up the respectful relationship approach, including my own organisation, which is council. So that the notion is, and the two organisations we've gone to out of the school is a council where there's a deeply authorising environment, and one of the largest business who's a fantastic player in our work. So what the idea is that then we will have all the schools, because it's rolling out through all the schools now, not only the pilot schools. So we'll have all of the schools, we'll have two of the largest employers in the Shire, and then we'll do like a next tranche of, well, who's next off the rank? Because what we want to do with it is to become the party to be in town. So this is the party you want to be a part of. So we don't go chasing the people who are the skeptics or the people who are not on board. We really just go where we have the deep authorisation. Where that gets us into trouble sometimes is some of the people who are not on board become vocal advocates against our work quite strongly and loudly, and we'll go political, we'll go to funders, that sort of stuff. So that's not a perfect system. So at times it's about cutting off some of that. And really what is behind that is fear and concern at loss of power. We have particular challenges with the health sector, partly because I think health are a very large service provider. They very much see themselves as the leaders of most things. And when others step into that role, there's a lot of fear that comes out, and that can play out quite poorly, quite badly.
So you've chosen to not engage?
What we do with the health sector, and a lot of stuff for them is that they do nothing. Go Goldfields does nothing, is going nowhere, and all of this sort of stuff. Because we're building action, not activity, and at times we don't give enough activity for people who are action oriented to see that something's going on. Does that make sense? So what we've done is we've involved health only in the activity. So we're doing youth service system redesign, and we have it chaired by a senior person from the hospital. We're doing, we have a senior person from the health service convene one of our other important meetings. And we have the health service involved in our service redesign for family violence. So we've shimmied their involvement down into the world that they know and understand well. Because when we've tried to involve them in the broader social change agenda, I just think it's not their gig. It's not their gift. But when you put them in the service sector world, they're really strong, so.
So knowing when to leverage different people and bring them in, yeah? That's
right.
I might just hand over at this point just to, there's lots to the story, because you've been going now how long?
Well, they employed me the end of 2011, and we've been implementing since the beginning of 2012. And we did the power change decision end of 2014, but the collaborative table has only been really functioning since we did the resetting at the end of 2016.
So we're talking long-term generational change.
Absolutely.
What's the end goal in terms of time that you're going to? What's the trajectory you're working towards?
We haven't got an end point in time. A lot of people, what we say is it will take us at least 10 to 15 years, but we've not said we are going to do. Some communities say by 2020 we will have zero unemployment or something like that. We haven't done that.
That's a risk Bob Hawke made that mistake.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. And we don't want to fall into the no child left in poverty thing. But also too, it's like we've had the same discussion around our indicators too and measuring difference. A lot of people say we will move our kindergarten engagement from 80% to 90%. Well, actually, we don't know how far or how fast this stuff's going to move. We're giving it a crack. And so what we aim for is a change, a significant change, rather than a percentage of change, which drives my measurement people spare. But as a consequence, sometimes you get better than you think you're going to. Like this, at this point in time, we have 98% attendance in all of our kindergartens. Now, 5 years ago, that was 60%. Now, that doesn't mean that that's fixed, and if we take our foot off the pedal, we're going to be at 98%. But it means that in the environment we're currently in, we're at 98%. So part of our work is, okay, what's holding that? What is causing that? Where is it because we've just all got our foot on the pedal and as soon as we take it off it's going to shimmy back? Or is there a fundamental change happening here, and what is that fundamental change?